the idea that many people think, whether they mean it or not, it's just misquoted or misunderstood a lot of times, the idea that like we found God.
Right.
And so, but really no one seeks after God of their own will, of their own volition.
No, because our hearts are darkened because we
are the ones that are lost.
Correct.
Not God.
And it's like, I get it, right? Like, and I understand the sentiment, oh, I found God and my life changed. No, like, okay, great. But let's think through that a little bit. God's not playing like this cosmic hide and seek.
Cosmic hide and seek. That's
right?
Awesome.
It's not happening.
Yeah.
We are the one who is sought. God is the seeker. We are the one who is lost.
Yeah.
God is the one who finds. And that's why I think it's very, I say this all the time to my kids, because we will be judged by every word that comes out of our mouth, and I think I proved that through the quotation of Jesus in the New Testament, but words matter.
Yeah.
And if we say a statement like, I found God, well, you're theologically incorrect. And to Yes, let's talk about the Bible.
We're in Romans 3, Romans Review. Thanks for joining us this week. Got AJ Riley here and myself, Jared Behringer.
There we go. On YouTube, Spotify, check us out.
Yep.
Click the link, subscribe, all that fun stuff that you have to say at the front so people will do it.
Yep. You can check that out, get caught up, and we're gonna get into it. So we're in Romans 3. This is the last of the. I mean, I wouldn't call it like
not the last
bad week.
Sure,
you know what I mean. But it's the bad news, I guess. Like I'm trying to think of how you worded it.
It's the last part of the section that we're teaching in that focuses on man's sinfulness.
There we go. Yes.
All right.
And
we move to a new section next week.
Yes. We ended in verse 20 of this past week,
Correct.
Setting up some good news for next week. So a little bit of review. We talk a lot about the idea of this cosmic courtroom.
Yeah.
How Paul is the prosecuting attorney and how he is responding to and debating and all that, these imaginary critics.
He is. That's leading to this diatribe of sorts, right? I don't know. For me, it's much easier to not understand, because I think Paul's very plain in what he says, but I love the setting of a courtroom. I think it makes it much simpler to understand, like, we are on trial before the judge, right? And Paul's laying forth his case. And I mean, in this lesson, I went as thick with the imagery of a courtroom
You did.
as I possibly could,
Yeah.
right? And I was trying to just imagine those great courtroom scenes and what Paul was trying to set up here with these imagined critics. He in the previous week, he had answered a bunch of their objections. And then this week he goes, okay, if you still have objections, well, then I'm going to bring a star witness before you.
Yeah.
And that star witness is your scriptures. So you really want to be critical now, right? That's kind of, you know what I mean? It was kind of the way that I felt like he went about it, and it was really, I don't know, I just felt like it really sets up the whole point that he's trying to make. Like, we are guilty.
Yeah.
Which sets up what justification means next week.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times we talk about it and we even sing about it. We think of it as like a pardon, that you're just like, oh, it's wiped away, right? But the term justification, and we're going to dive into this a lot next week, is, no, you're declared righteous. It's not just this simple like wipe. It's a declaration of your righteousness that comes from something outside yourself.
Yep. So, getting just kind of basic here. Not sure what everybody's where everybody is on their in their faith, on their spiritual journey. If you're listening to this, if you have anything to do with religion, or if you have a relationship with Jesus or not, but how do you get to heaven? So, do all paths lead to heaven? Are there multiple ways to get to heaven? Is there anything we can do on our own?
No.
To get there.
And I think that's the point that Paul's trying to make, right? Is there is nothing within ourselves or based on our own merit that will get us there.
Yeah.
And it is a fundamental flaw of, well, put it like this. One writer will say that, there's a divine initiative. There's really only two religions in the world: human merit or divine initiative. One is Christianity, which is divine initiative. Mm-hmm. Every other religion is based on human merit.
Yeah.
And what Paul is saying here is there's no merit.
Yeah.
There's no good. And when Jesus said in John 14, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he's saying the only way to heaven is through me. Yes, that's narrow, but that's true.
Yeah.
I've said it one way that, every other religion is about what we do to get to God, and Christianity is what God did to get to us. Right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of the point that, Paul's making in this opening section of, from chapter 1, verses 18 through chapter 3, verse 20. That's an entire section of teaching that we've done.
Yeah.
And that entire section is based on man's unrighteousness.
Yeah.
And he's saying, stop trying to get there, because there is nothing that you will be able to do to get there. I mean, Isaiah even says, all your righteousness is as if they're filthy rags before God.
Yeah.
There's quite an image that is painted with what those filthy rags actually are, which we will get into next week.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, but there's nothing we can do. How you get to righteousness is through the justification that's provided by the death of Christ. So,
prior to one's justification, there's this idea that we are spiritually dark. We cannot understand God's word without that regenerated heart.
Correct. I mean, that's what he says, right? There's no one who understands in verse 11. There's nothing of spiritual goodness that you will understand prior to God working miraculously in your life.
Yeah.
When he talks about drawing people to himself, that drawing to them is the beginning of that process.
Yeah, for sure. It's one reason I don't, in engaging unbelievers, I don't like to just throw the Bible at them. That sounds a little like contradictory because it's like, no, they need the Bible, but it's like throwing out like these, like every knee's gonna bow one day, and they don't know what that means. No. Like what, like is that a reference to like Superman or something? Like kneel before Zod? Like people don't know. Like explain it to them. Like walk them through that, and it's likely the Spirit and the Father are already drawing them to them. But just to like, it's just, I don't know, just keep that in mind. It's like you can't just like quote these abstract verses at unbelievers and then get mad when they don't like understand it. It's like, no, they can't understand it.
You're gonna get me in trouble because you're leading me down a path here.
Let's go.
It's part of the issue that I have with like soul winning classes.
Yeah.
And I know that like our church used to do them, and it was a requirement to go on a mission trip and all that. Like I get it.
Oh, it was.
It was. It was.
I get it.
I get it too.
I don't like the terminology,
but at the same time, like, we're taking these verses which speak truth, right? Romans 3:23, Romans 3:10, Romans 3:23, Romans 5:8, Romans 6:23, Romans 10, 9 through 10. Take them down the Romans road, which I'm fine with, right? Because at the base level, like, that is a basic understanding. But as Christians, why do we need to be trained in that? Why can't we explain the gospel of what God has done and allow our lives, number one, and then our conversations to speak to those things? right? Like the next section of verses, if we threw out the Romans road, okay? Just hear me on this. It's an example. But if we threw out the Romans road and just read people Romans 3:23 through 26, that's all they need to know to be saved.
Yeah.
All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, but are justified in his sight through the death of Jesus Christ. Like, that's all. And I get a lot of people coming and saying, like, we need this. We need, like, soul winning classes. No, we don't need soul winning classes. What we need is for people to just be Christians.
Yeah, I would flip that and say what you need to do is to learn personal evangelism.
Correct.
Yeah.
But it's not door knocking.
Exactly.
The days of door knocking, and like our church used to have a huge visitation ministry, and I think that visitation has its time and place, but in 2024, it doesn't have that place.
I'm hesitant to say that it just can't work, but I just know from personal experience, like people don't answer the door, you know what I mean? And you're immediately branded as either a salesman,
right?
Somebody that's like trying to fundraise, or like somebody that's trying to push a weird cult religion.
Correct. and I guess the question, I think, in a lot of ways, and this, I mean, it's not off topic, but it kind of is, like, do we want to be militant in our evangelism, or do we want to be relational in our evangelism? Mm-hmm. Do we want to be militant? If you died tonight, where would you go? Like, that's a militant question. Yeah, I don't ever remember Jesus going and asking that question.
So I think there's a way to do it.
There is a way to do it for sure, but when that's the lead question, that's a conversation stopper.
Yeah, it's like, right? Oh, this guy's weird. Yeah, I was just listening to something Jonathan Bacluta said, and he was put on not put on a plane, but he was on a plane and was next to somebody. And after talking to them a little bit and getting to know them a little bit, then he segued.
Correct.
With his story.
Because there's relationship, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I think, in the day and age in which we live, they long for relationship. Mm-hmm. We as a created humanity desire community. I forget which writer it was. It says, no man is an island unto himself, because in reality, even though we do have introverts and things like that, people still need community. We were built and created for community. Mm-hmm. Now, that community needs to be built relationally, meaning we build relationships with those around us. And there's a book, I forget who wrote it, but it was one that I had in my undergraduate studies that was just called lifestyle discipleship. Like, when we think about the way that Jesus went about and made his disciples, yes, he was a teacher and told them, come and follow me, but he approached them relationally too. Mm-hmm. And he built relationships with them throughout the lifestyle that he led as he discipled them. And I think that is something that can kind of be lost in that kind of militaristic, visitation, door knocking. It has its place, and I'm not going to condemn somebody for going out and trying to spread the gospel.
It's cultural too.
But I don't know if it needs to be this en masse, ministry that, is. I think we need to focus more on being better relationship builders than we need to be about being better visitors.
It's cultural, and it's where we are as a society too. You're dealing with people now that many of them don't even have a context for what the Bible is.
Correct.
For who Jesus is.
Correct.
They have no idea what the Old and New Testament is, and the cross and Calvary. What does that even mean? And I've been on missions trips in countries that are literally ripe for harvest, and people have that knowledge, and it's just misguided. And through a simple gospel presentation, they're like, oh my gosh, and they accept Christ and their lives are changed. And it's just, in a lot of times in post-Christian nations, which we are now, and those in Europe as well, it's harder. Mm-hmm. It's not just post-Christian nations too. It's nations like Japan and China.
And I think that that's a philosophical shift that has to exist within the church, because, during the heyday, right, during the baby boomer generation, like, it wasn't a post-Christian nation. So you had people who had a general idea or whatever, and you could go door knocking and they would understand, and so on and so forth. But in today's day and age, they worry more about the relationship that you can build with them than this, visitation. And I think it really boils down to the question of, what is your goal with your evangelism?
Yeah.
Is your goal simply conversion? Or is your goal to fulfill the Great Commission and to make disciples?
Yeah.
Because arguably those ministries that don't produce disciples but just get a lot of conversions aren't fulfilling the Great Commission.
Yeah.
Because the Great Commission does not say, go and preach the gospel to every nation and make converts.
Yeah.
The Great Commission says, go and preach the gospel to every nation and make disciples.
For sure.
And I think that is something that needs to be focused on, which is why, I kind of said this in the introduction to this lesson, but there's a bit of a reforming in the way that we need to do things, and a lot of that reforming centers around learning the Bible and learning doctrine. Because if you're going to be a good disciple, then you have to understand what the Bible teaches.
Yeah.
And you can use that understanding of doctrine to build relationships, and as JP said, shift those conversations to an eternal conversation.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be militant.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. So let's talk about one of your pet peeves.
Oh, yeah, let's do that, please. I love talking about my pet peeves.
Here's your soapbox.
Was I too harsh on that? People
No.
agreed with me when I said it.
No, you weren't too harsh.
Okay. Because I expected some people to look very confused, and when I said it, they were like all on board with what I said. And I was like, okay, maybe we're getting through, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe it's clicking a little bit.
You've got like a Bowie knife behind your back. You're like, okay, let it
I
go.
don't need to use this tonight. Yeah.
You're like ready to go.
I was like, yeah.
Yeah. So the idea that many people think, whether they mean it or not, it's just misquoted or misunderstood a lot of times, the idea that like we found God.
Right.
And so, but really no one seeks after God of their own will, of their own volition.
No, because our hearts are darkened because we
are the ones that are lost.
Correct.
Not God.
And it's like, I get it, right? Like, and I understand the sentiment, I found God and my life changed. No, like, okay, great. But let's think through that a little bit. God's not playing like this cosmic hide and seek.
Cosmic hide and seek. That's
right?
Awesome.
It's not happening.
Yeah.
We are the one who is sought. God is the seeker. We are the one who is lost.
Yeah.
God is the one who finds. And that's why I think it's very, I say this all the time to my kids, because we will be judged by every word that comes out of our mouth, and I think I proved that through the quotation of Jesus in the New Testament, but words matter.
Yeah.
And if we say a statement like, I found God, well, you're theologically incorrect. And to be theologically incorrect means that you're bordering on heresy.
Yeah.
Which means we have to be truthful in what we say if we are people who purport to have the truth.
Yeah.
And it's why it's so dangerous that we don't, or it's so dangerous that we say what we actually mean.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is we can't go around speaking half-truths.
Yeah.
Because we are people that claim to have the truth, and if we're not speaking in the truth, or if we're not saying things that are the truth, or if we're sharing information online that is untruthful, then we have a problem.
Yeah.
Right? And it just creates a mess.
I went to a monthly pastors meeting probably 10 years ago now, and they had this kid in their church that wrote a song, and the pastor was like, I want him to sing it. And the song was called I Found God, and it was like, that was literally what the whole song was about. And it was terrible. I'll tell you about it another time, man.
Yeah.
It was terrible.
Offline.
It was terrible. the theology was atrocious, and like everybody was like, "Amen." I'm like, "Golly, guys!"
But that's the problem.
Yeah,
and you've just hit the nail on the head. You've got
they were more excited about seeing like this young kid skip school that day to help our meeting.
Use your gifts and talents. But how about a pastor discipling that kid to mentor him and say, let's make sure that this is what the Bible actually teaches, because God was never lost.
Yeah. Well, according to this kid, he was.
Well, yeah, and there are plenty of other heretics who've been condemned as well, right?
Yeah. Words matter, man.
Words 100% matter, especially when you claim to be people who have the truth.
Yeah.
We cannot get away from that fact. If you want to be somebody who is known to have the truth, then there cannot be any false information found in the words that you say. Yep.
You gotta fact check what you're saying. You can't just like say all these Christianese sayings.
Fact check what you share online.
Yeah. Crazy thought.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. It's crazy.
So one of the things that you mentioned this week's past lesson is the idea of civic righteousness. Mm-hmm. So can you explain what that is? Elaborate on that.
Yeah, it's just more of a horizontal relationship of doing good between each other, right? Calvin's the one that actually was quoted in a commentary that I was reading that called it civic righteousness, that sinners and unregenerate people do still good, donate to charity, whatever activities that may be charitable. Mm-hmm. But that good, and what I said in the lesson, which I still hold true, is if we shift the goalpost to define what good is, then that's going to shift our theology on what salvation actually is.
Yep.
The standard for good scripturally is the glory of God, is the righteousness of God. And no matter how much good a sinner may do civically righteous, it still falls short of that glory.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the whole bend and point behind, this idea of civic righteousness. It has no bearing on our eternal state.
Yeah.
Because
we can do no eternal good outside of Christ's
righteousness being placed upon us.
Yeah, absolutely. You spent a little bit of time talking about the fear of God. Mm-hmm. I think in society today, it's like almost one of those things that people that don't have anything to do with religion, it's like one of those, it's like, that's why I don't believe in God, because like God isn't somebody that we should fear. Like we shouldn't be, I literally just saw a video on that, and they're like, we shouldn't obey, or we shouldn't follow a God that we have to fear. And it's like, man, you're totally
lost.
Completely misunderstanding what the context of that fear is. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, and I don't understand, like, why would you not be, if you didn't fear God, then it's not a God, right?
Yeah. Well, they're creating the kind of God that they want. So,
correct.
So
which is,
well, I want a God that loves me. And
guess what? He does.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I want a God that loves me and that condones everything that I do, just as long as I'm good to other people.
Correct.
And I'm not hurting. Yeah.
And that's where, we get back into that Romans 1:18. We've exchanged the truth about God for a lie.
Yeah.
We have gone and fashioned and formed out of clay and dirt.
Yeah.
Gods that we can worship that offer no fear.
So what is that? What is that fear? What is that?
Well, I think it works itself out
like
two
just
ways.
Like like a cowardice, or like you're shriveling up because you're scared.
Well, I think it's different for those who have been justified and those who have not been justified. Those who haven't been justified, your fear resides in the wrath of God. Mm-hmm. He is a God who will punish you because of your sin.
Yeah.
There is a judgment coming. But yet, for those who are justified, I mean, look at, I used the example of Isaiah, and I used the example of John in Revelation. Mm-hmm. they were justified men and yet still fell down as though dead, John writes in Revelation, when they saw the glory and the majesty of this ultimately holy and righteous being, understanding and crying like Isaiah, woe is me, because they're completely undone.
Yeah.
And I think what ends up happening, especially when we're a justified person, is we tend to lessen the holiness of God because our sins are covered.
Yeah.
When it's like, no. You're still wretched. You're still a sinner who has had righteousness placed upon them. And there is still this ultimately holy and righteous person that you pale in comparison to.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's the idea of, fear for sure because of wrath. But once that justification has happened, that fear doesn't come from the wrath, but it comes from the awe-inspiring, just holiness of who God is.
It's like it's a reverence,
it's
too.
It's 100% reverential.
And a respect. And
you think about it and that's why I think God is called, Father, right? We think about our dads, right? Or the dads that we aspire to be. It's not my job to be my friend, my kid's friend. And I've told my kids that. I'm not here to be your buddy. I love you. Mm-hmm. I love you more than anything. But at the same time, I also have to be the one that holds you accountable. Mm-hmm. So I do want my children to fear me, not out of my wrath, but I want them to fear me out of the fact that I love them so much that I'm not going to allow them to,
what's best for them.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it's the same type of thing when we view God in that way. He is the ultimate standard. And in any comparison to him, we fall short and therefore must fall reverentially at his feet to say, I'm falling down as dead before you.
Yeah, yeah. So let's end with this, talking about the law. There's nothing good inside of us, and apart from what Christ has done in our hearts. And he said one minor transgression is a transgression of the entire law.
Correct.
And it just paints a picture that there truly is nothing that we can do on our own to earn our righteousness. I just want to hit that home for people that are listening to this. There's nothing that you can do to ever save yourself. Mm-mm. There's no eternal good that you can do outside of Christ's working in your heart and regenerating you. And only then can you produce any type of righteousness.
Correct. It's the rich young ruler, right? We use that example in the lesson. But he said, what good must I do to inherit her? And
you already messed it up.
It's like, change your theology, first of all, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but we do the same thing.
Yeah.
Church attendance.
Totally.
Right? Church attendance, tithes that we give, songs that we sing, translations that we read. We mark those as the good that we do, as if it's going to be some magic pill that gets us into heaven.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, none of that. Because only through the law, as Paul says in verse 20, comes the knowledge of sin. Because you can't keep the law perfectly. There's one person who has kept the law perfectly, and his name was Jesus.
Yeah.
They murdered him. And then he came back to life, which produced our justification. The whole thing that we're talking about. The one person who kept the law perfectly was murdered because of it, and that ultimately was our justification.
Yeah.
So for us to in vain try to keep some kind of man-made law will always fall short of the glory of God.
For sure. So, man, I wasn't planning on saying this, but if you're listening or you're watching and you realize that, gosh, I don't have I don't have that relationship with God that we talk about. Mm-hmm. I've never been regenerated. All of this has been confusing, but there's something stirring inside of me. like I want to know more. I would say God's drawing you, and God's doing some kind of work in your heart, and we'd love to talk to you. So
Absolutely.
shoot us a message.
Absolutely.
Man, it's simple. Salvation is not complicated. So you can have your sins forgiven, stand right with God. If you just call on his name and repent, confess with your heart, or confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus is Lord.
Correct.
Yep.
And that's a good place to end.
Yeah. Hopefully you guys went to church somewhere for Easter.
Correct. Yeah.
If you didn't, then start this Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's important.
You want to join us live 6:30 on Wednesday nights in our chapel here at Beacon Baptist Church. You can also catch the live stream on YouTube.
Yep.
And join us on Sunday mornings at 9:30 for Sunday school and 11 o'clock for Big Church.
Yep.
We'll see you all next week.
See you guys.